So first of all, somewhere along the line, I think I'm going to have to walk around because this is, you know, this is distant. Second of all, I need to ask you some questions to begin with. Demographics. Raise your hand if you've served in the military. Okay, raise your hand if you've served in the Air Force. And what did you do in the Air Force?
Intel.
And are you still in?
I'm in the reserves now, yeah.
Okay. Other military folks, what did you do?
I was in the Army, yeah.
And Army, West Point grad, what class?
07.
And infantry guy? Okay.
Army, but I'm from Denmark.
You're Army from Denver, and what did you do?
I was a military linguist.
Very cool. And there was one other one, I thought. Yeah.
Army infantry.
Got it. So another infantry. Okay, so how many of you have served in OSD to include internships? Okay. How many of you desire to work in the national security space when you complete your degree?
Everybody, come on,
Okay.
raise your hand. What do you think?
Okay.
Gonna go.
So that demographic is important to me for a couple of reasons. One of the things that I do is I moonlight actually over at SICE. I teach American defense policy over at SICE. And one of the things that I've noticed since I've been teaching there is how the demographics of the classroom have been changing. And this is neither good nor bad, right? This is all about how people enter into the national security arena, what kind of background they bring into it, and then how do they build credibility in that space, right? And as the demographics change, how you all begin to build your credibility in that space is something that you just always need to be mindful of. The military experience it can be helpful. It can also be a hindrance. So it's neither good nor bad. It is just different. And one of the conversations I hope that we get into today, when we talk specifically about the Air Force, is if you are a civilian that is moving into this space, how do you begin to know and understand these foreign cultures in a way that you build credibility with them? So that is number one. Number two is, and there is nothing you can say to this that will hurt my feelings. When you hear the expression Air Force, and I'm talking specifically the United States Air Force, what are the things that come to your mind? And don't think deeply about this. And I'll put the one everybody is reluctant to say out, the chair force. It's not real military, it's the chair force. If you haven't heard that. What else? You're laughing.
I was going to say that one.
You were going to say the chair force? Okay. What else?
Airpower.
Airpower. Yeah, please.
I was told it's the word the intelligent people of the military.
Airpower, the intelligent people. I like that. We can run with that. Of course, that's after I got out. Yeah, please.
I'll counter that by saying that you build the golf courses first, then the
Golf
runway.
course. Yeah. And we built the runway around the golf course. What else? Come on, you guys read Mask of War. Come on. I'll start calling. Yeah, no.
I just think pilots. They're all
Pilots.
pilots.
Everybody's
I don't know who
pilots.
fuels them, maintains them. It's just a bunch of pilots.
Just a bunch of pilots. Okay. I'm going to go all the way at the end with a scarf. What do you think?
From builder, I think about toys, like
Toys.
high technology.
And if the answer is nothing, that's also fine, right? Most people in the United States, when you ask them about the United States military, they might think about Army, Navy, football. I don't know. Yeah, please.
Am I allowed to say?
You are allowed to say.
Awesome.
Awesome. Okay. Most Air Force Intel guys wouldn't say that. What else? I need a couple of more. Please.
Some conflict in unmanned plane and airmen.
Okay, you got the unloved UAVs or the drones, as we will call them. Okay, you were going to say something.
So they're dedicated to their planes before anything else.
Okay, so this is the builder, the toys,
I think strategic bombing.
You think strategic bombing. Okay. Okay, anything else? Yeah.
Too expensive.
Too expensive. Is there anything else we should put out on the table for, yeah,
They shy away from the close air support mission.
Oh, yeah, when he pulls air support, yeah, get rid of the A-10 gas, okay.
There's always an F with a higher number that you need.
Well, sometimes they go lower. Does everybody, so if I were to ask, and I'm gonna take that and run with this for a second, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but if I were to ask randomly somebody to tell me the difference between the F-22 and the B-17, just raise your hand if you'd be able to explain that. Okay, so, and like I said, I'm not gonna put you on the spot. I will tell you that if you want to enter into the national security space, and you cannot, with confidence, in a nanosecond, tell the difference between an F-22 and a B-17, your credibility will be nil. Okay, these are things. So it's the practical lessons as well as the conversation that we're going to trip down here. Okay, I did that exercise because we could actually take a good hour and a half. And we could use Builder, we could use Jeff's dissertation, we could actually use a lot of the stuff that the Army War College puts out to get at organizational culture, and we would have, at the end of the day, we would have this stew of descriptors to describe the United States Air Force's organizational culture. I'm going to focus on the Air Force today, and I wrote a thing, and it's nice and short because it's for airmen. It's called Over Not Through. That this is based on, and you can just download that for free from the RAND website. I would argue that you could do this for every single service, and whatever model that you use to do this, it could be a potential entry point for those of you who are interested in sort of getting your head around the military culture, but you're not really quite sure where to begin, if you will. So I came to this question. I retired from the Air Force in 2009. If you include my time at the Air Force Academy, I had 33 years in uniform. And when I retired, I was more puzzled about the service that I was in and the uniform I wore than I was when I swore an oath of allegiance at 17 years of age. And that both fascinated me, puzzled me obviously, and in a way it kind of concerned me because for any kind of successful organization, one of my underlying premises is that you need to have an organizational culture around which you can rally, especially when that organization is going through a tough time. And so I spent the next few years as a retiree, my early couple of years at RAND, trying to figure out this thing called the United States Air Force, that not only had I served in uniform, but now at the RAND Corporation, in theory, I was leading the strategy and doctrine program there. And I came up with two questions that I just wanted to answer for myself. The first one was, why does the Air Force have so many of these seemingly different organizational cultures? And the second one was, does it matter? You know, maybe that is absolutely fine. So what I did then, and this is sort of, this is over not through, but it's also what I've been thinking about subsequently over the years since I wrote this. What I then did is I distilled a series of narratives. Am I allowed to walk, or
You can walk.
And can I go over there?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I did then is I started thinking about, okay, how do I begin to understand the Air Force? How do I actually begin to distill all of the different things that are happening in this particular organization, and where do I fit? Not to mention all of my other colleagues and everything else. And I came up, over time, with 6 narratives. And I just put the letters on here because because the whiteboard's small. The first narrative I came up with was something called Over Not Through. And the narratives all tie to 3 things. They tie to technology, they tie to leadership, and they tie to the problem that the nation was trying to solve. And the over not through narrative goes all the way back to the First World War. And it goes back to, you know,
Billy Mitchell.
what's that?
Billy Mitchell going over instead of.
Well, and it's not, I mean, it's not just Billy Mitchell, right? He becomes sort of the personification, actually, I would argue, of the second school, which is Give Me Liberty. But the problem that the nation was trying to solve in World War I, at least one of the problems, is when you strip it away, is there is this stalemate on the Western Front. You have land forces going after each other time after time after time. Is there a different way to solve the problem? And the over not through is, well, why do we have to go through the trenches? You know, and this includes the introduction of the tank and everything else. Why can't we just fly over them? Why can't we not just think about this problem in 3 dimensions rather than think about it in 2? And so if you look at how air power is used in World War I, it's basically a laboratory, right? First of all, it's used for intel, it's used for surveillance, things like that. And then there is a little bit of air-to-air, you know, the guys shooting each other with pistols outside their open cockpits. And then there's a little bit of bombing, and the Germans do a little bit more than a little bit of bombing when they actually take their bombers and actually strike London. So that's the first narrative. And the leadership of that particular narrative, the Billy Mitchells and friends like his, these guys are air pioneers. They are young. They think that the infantry guys just don't get it. And they are innovators and inventors. And they think that their invention, their technology is so important that it has revolutionized how we think about warfare. So then you go into the next narrative, right? When you're no longer actually solving a problem with organized violence, the next thing is, well, now what do we do? Crap, in the end of warriors, right? There's no money, people don't care, we come home. And you have the Akers, the Mitchells, the Scotts, the Jimmy Doolittles, all of these guys, and the Hap Arnold, who is a part of this school also. They come together in what I call the Give Me Liberty School. And the Give Me Liberty School is all about, hey, we get this new technology. We are the startup of our era. We are the Apple, we are the Google. You guys that grew up on the ground, you don't get it. You have got to give me the liberty to understand and use my invention, my air power in such a way that it can be decisive on the battlefield. And one of the big challenges this particular school had was, what kind of problem is it that we're really trying to solve with this if you're going to make air power decisive? And at the time they said, well, of course it's coastal defense, because they didn't imagine anybody actually coming across the Atlantic, or they didn't actually imagine going back to Europe, is what I'm trying to say. So the leadership of this school is also a bomber-focused leadership. Strategic bombing, you can be decisive from the air, on the ground, revolutionize warfare. But you have got to give me the organizational, occupational independence to do that. You have got to untether me from the land. You have got to separate me from the Army. And this is when Billy Mitchell has his extremely obnoxious but well-known hour of the Billy Mitchell court-martial, and makes a name for himself throughout the military. They then go into a third narrative. So you have the first two, one product of the First World War, the second one is the product of the interwar era. The third one is the victory through air power narrative. This is when you actually have bombers that have 4 engines, and the B-17, for those of you who don't know it, the B-17 is the iconic bomber of the Second World War. It is the 8th Air Force bomber, and it is one that airmen still look to and they identify with. The victory through air power narrative, led by folks who are of the bomber school, say, we are going to demonstrate to you that we can be decisive in war, okay? So, and they would say, oh, by the way, that the ultimate example of the decisiveness of air power is none other than the use of the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. That is the air power sort of apogee, if you will, of being decisive from the air, minimal delivery vehicles required, minimal friendly casualties, and awful impact on the enemy. And they would say that this victory through air power narrative demonstrated that the Air Force at that point in time had shown that it could operate decisively for the United States and for the United States military if in fact it was allowed the organizational independence to do what it needed to do. So it's the bomber community, it is bomber leadership, it is a huge national problem, right? Fighting two major theater wars, basically trying to wage a global war. The next thing is, well, crap. We won the Second World War, now what happens, right? Because one of the themes that I'm assuming comes up in your conversations in your classes is the militaries really hate the period immediately after a war, right? Because we don't need you. You guys did what we paid you to do. You defeated the enemy. Thank God we can get back to business as usual. And what do we do? Oh man, well let's bring down the number of ships. Let's bring down this number of soldiers. Let's turn the aircraft into razor blades. And the Marine Corps, we're always trying to get rid of the Marine Corps, but of course they are always lobbying Capitol Hill brilliantly, and so somehow they get language written in that actually pluses them up. So the issue that the Air Force is wrestling with during the Cold War, I would argue is this is peace is our profession. This is the little bumper sticker that Curtis LeMay ostensibly made of we have this entire huge nuclear deterrent. It needs to be operated by the United States Air Force because you go back to World War II, the strategic bombing is the core mission of the United States Air Force. The United States Air Force, if it has that core mission, it owns the bombers. If it owns the bombers, it owns the weapons. If it owns the weapons, it means it owns the atomic weapons. If it owns the atomic weapons, then it has the nuclear deterrent mission. So this is the whole peace is our profession. What's interesting during this time period is this is when some interesting tensions begin to emerge within the Air Force itself. It gets its independence in 1947. So it becomes a separate service and the dominant service all within a couple of years of each other. And when I say it becomes the dominant service, 70% of the budget goes to the United States Air Force. If you pull out Korea, 50-53, throughout most of the 1950s and until Vietnam, the Air Force is pulling down a huge part of the budget dollars there. What's interesting is during that time, some other things are being introduced, and they're actually being kind of forced onto the uniform bomber leadership. One is ICBMs. The whole thing of what we actually have to deliver this stuff with an airplane. Can't we deliver it with missiles? Wouldn't that be cheaper? Wouldn't that be smarter? And then the corollary to that is, well, hey, if we're going to deliver ICBMs, do you think we can get 0 CEP? Circle air probable means that you can really hit the target. And if we can get 0 CEP, then probably we need navigation devices. If we need navigation devices, we probably need to do satellite navigation. If we do satellite navigation, is there a way that we can come up with space systems that do that? Thus is born the whole idea of GPS, okay? Your cell phones are all wedded to the idea of nuclear targeting. So every time you look at those things, just think about that. GPS's genesis tracks back to giving you 0 CEP. So this particular narrative is the dominant one through the Cold War. At the end of the Cold War, and especially this goes to Bosnia, Kosovo, basically the issues in the Balkans in particular, I would argue that you have another narrative that emerges, and it's victory through air power, but now it's not the bomber leadership that's advocating it, it's the fighter leadership. And this is one of the things that begins to manifest itself, and it goes back to those of you that talked about the Air Force and its toys. The thing about fighters is one person flies them, they can go hypersonic, they are really cool, they are really fast, and you don't have to worry about a crew, so you are in charge of no one. And the more capable the technology is, the more capable those fighters are. There is an eternal battle within the Air Force leadership over who should have that dominant leadership role. And by the time the Balkans roll around, it is the fighter generals who are now the dominant personalities and the dominant leaders, rather than the bomber generals, because who gives a rat's ass now about bombers, right? You know, Cold War's over, we don't need no stupid nukes, let's negotiate them all the way. So, those nukes, very, very old-fashioned bombs, very, very old-fashioned. And fighters actually an F-15 can do every bit as much as a B-17 during World War II. So, so it's all a wash. So there is this, and the fighter guys will tell you that the Balkans, and then certainly Desert Shield, Desert Storm, all continue to validate their belief that in fact air power is decisive, that the land forces are just there to augment it. Certainly the naval forces, we'll just roll them into our air tasking order, and that air power actually can be decisive, just get out of our way. Then there is another crisis of confidence, right? And this is, the CE here stands for we are the critical enabler. There is this moment of wonder, of shock and awe in the early days of OIF and OEF, when the Air Force has some decisive strikes, whether it's in Baghdad, whether it's in Kabul, but that dissipates pretty damn fast. And the next thing you know, the United States is bogged down in insurgencies, in 2 land wars, both in the Central Command area of operations, and all of a sudden 2 things are happening to the Air Force that it really doesn't understand. First of all, is its people are being pulled away in 1s and 2s to augment the ground forces. So for the first time ever, on a day-to-day basis, airmen in support roles are actually in greater danger than the folks flying the aircraft. And they might be on convoy duty, they might be serving in provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan, but they tend to be more junior in rank, and they certainly are out of support fields. They are not out of flying operations. The other thing that's really interesting about that is they begin to identify more with the ground forces. You will, if you talk to an airman downrange, all of a sudden, if you ask them how they're doing, they'll say, "Hua." And you're like, "Aren't you an airman? Why are you saying hua to me?" It's the ubiquitous Army expression. There's requests from airmen to wear their Army patches on their uniform, because they've come to identify with those land units. And then this gets really confused because Robert Gates, oh my God, that guy has shoved drones down the Air Force's throat. And so all of a sudden, you go from, you guys know what a CAP is? Combat Air Patrol. You go from maybe 5 or 6 CAPs, which means that these aircraft are flying overhead, and that they're providing intelligence, and a lot of times they're also providing strike if it's called in. To Robert Gates says, you don't need an F-22. What you need are more drones, okay? So the fighter leadership absolutely goes crazy. And the Air Force loses during this critical enabler time. The Air Force sees its Chief of Staff and its Secretary of Air Force fired. Now, Gates would say that they were fired because the Air Force somehow went from loving the nuke mission to somehow flying live nukes over the United States and not knowing it, and sending pieces and parts to Taiwan for nuclear weapons that nobody knew how they got there. But the Air Force says, no. They were fired because they challenged the Secretary of Defense and told him, you don't get it. The F-22 is really important, these drones, not so much. So this period for OIF and OEF turns the Air Force on its head in terms of who is really conceptualizing what air power does and how does it solve problems on behalf of the nation. And the absolute, bottoming out of this particular narrative is when General Schwartz comes in as the Chief of Staff of the Air Force and he says, hey, we are all in on the joint fight. Whatever you need us to do, we will do on behalf of our joint brethren. And the fighter community in particular said, you have just turned us back into, not even the Army Air Forces, you turned us back into the Army Air Corps, the Signal Corps. My God, do you know what you're doing? Oh, by the way, General Schwartz was a C-130 pilot and special operator. He was not a fighter pilot. So to complicate all of this, so these are, I identify these, I argue that these are separate narratives that pop up at different points in time in the Air Force's history. To complicate this even more is the narrative before, or to before, never really dies. What happens is it recedes, and so as airmen come into the service, they get to pick your narrative, right? It's not like the Marine Corps, first to fight, every Marine a rifleman. It's, what do I want to be today? And at the same time that there is this cacophony of narratives, the technology is really, literally taking off. And it's not just taking off when it comes to space, when it comes to cyber. It's all over the place, especially when you start thinking about AI and things like that. So this causes, and I would argue still causes for the Air Force, a really significant problem. And it's one that I, at the end of the day, what I will call it's the 3M versus GE problem. And the question then, if these narratives exist, right, and if these internal, this is how airmen internally think about themselves, then the question becomes, well, so what? Who cares? Tell me the last time that the United States Air Force didn't deliver on what it was supposed to deliver on behalf of the nation. I look, you strike these targets, and in OIR, you're providing all sorts of ground support. Tell me, have they failed? So there is a completely legitimate school out there that says, Thornhill, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. This is a waste of my time. The United States Air Force is absolutely fine, and it's doing its mission absolutely fine. The flip side of that, which is where I tend to come down, is that narratives matter deeply, and they matter deeply not necessarily for the optimal. They matter for establishing the baseline. And at some point, as you have all of these different, whether you call them tribes or cylinders or stovepipes or whatever it is that you want to call them, you suboptimize and you keep suboptimizing. And at some point, you actually have a rivalry growing up inside the service itself, especially if you throw BCA and sequestration and all of these other factors on there of who's most important. Well, how do I know who's most important? What do? I follow where the budget share goes. I follow where the people go. And all of a sudden, it's, as you know from Builder, it's not just the services fighting amongst each other and competing, but it's actually a terrific intra-service rivalry that is manifesting itself and causing all sorts of problems. So if that's the case, and if there is a case that you need to have some sort of core narrative, not the sole narrative. Even the Marine Corps, if you talk to the aviators in the Marine Corps versus talk to the infantry guys the aviators don't get haircuts as often, and they're more lackadaisical than your riflemen, and so there's all sorts of behavioral things that you can see, but they all have a core narrative that they come back to that underpins everything. So if some sort of core narrative matters, then my question was, okay, well then Thornhill, what should it be? And what I came back to is it's over, not through. But it's the conceptualization of over, not through. And my argument is that the Air Force contributes most to the nation to solve problems that require organized violence solutions when it looks at those problems differently than any other military organization in order to provide radically different solutions to those problems. That's when the Air Force is at its absolute best. And the question is that important enough to the Air Force to embrace the concept of innovation versus embrace the idea that the equipment, the system, the toy is itself the innovation, and that how you apply that operational concept that you will use to apply it is then the secondary effect of that. And if this whole thing with innovation actually is true, then you have to accept that it comes with consequences, right? And you have to accept a couple of different things that tie into it. First of all, your whole theory of air power needs to be relooked. Is it aerospace power? Is there such a thing? Does theory even matter? And if you think about how Builder makes the argument that you take the toy and you shove it into the theory, this is a question of, do we actually need a theory or do we throw it out altogether? And then how do we inculcate that in our force? If we're inculcating it in our force, then the next question becomes, how do we actually do that? If you have followed any of the internal debates within the military about how they educate their officers in particular, there's this whole big debate about professional military education, about how it's a marginal education given to marginal intellectuals so that they can then get their appropriate promotion and move on. If you really are putting innovation and the startup mentality at the core, then you really have to rethink how you educate your entire force, and in particular your officer corps. The third problem that this creates is you have the challenge of what kind of organizational structure actually works. And militaries have this challenge. I should say the United States military has this challenge with some frequency. We want startup mentality. We want matrix organizations. We want the strategic corporal. We want to empower at the lowest possible level. Yeah, we want to do that until we want to hammer Corporal Thornhill because she overspent on her credit card and she's now got $10,000 of credit card debt, and oh, by the way, there's a domestic, and oh, by the way, and on and on and on. So you want that startup flat organization until you need the hierarchy to keep it disciplined. So if the Air Force is going to wrestle with that, then it really needs to think organizationally about how you actually maintain a military structure without actually losing that military ethos in the process. The other thing that this requires is not every single problem requires an innovative solution, and this is another thing that the services are running after right now a lot, which is how do I take algorithmic warfare and how do I take that and integrate it into what I'm doing in order to get me a leg up on the Russians or on the Chinese or whatever. It's actually figuring out what is the big operational problem that needs to be solved and why. And then it has to be pursued relentlessly. And this is the other interesting thing from a leadership perspective when you look at your other services that's always interesting to be mindful of. The Air Force tends to have leaders that their legacy is as long as their period in office. So an Air Force chief, if an Air Force chief wants to have a legacy, that Air Force chief needs to be focused on the 4 years that so far that he has been in office. The likelihood of that legacy being continued, not as strong as the likelihood of one commandant trying to be consistent with another commandant. So when you pull the thread on all of this, the question is, what kind of organized violence problem do you need a United States Air Force to solve? And are you willing to craft that service in order to create that force and then solve that problem on behalf of the nation? Going back to what I said about the 3M versus GE moment, I think for the Air Force this is an issue that it's just coming to a head, and it'll come to a head one way or the other, implicitly or explicitly. 3M, many moons ago, was the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company. And 3M made a decision back, I think in the 1920s, that mining was not where it's at, and that what we do is we innovate. We don't make things as much as we make things better. And their stock, if you follow how their stock is tracked, it is tracked and followed this model basically since the 20s and 30s. GE, if you have been following the news, GE in the 1980s was a huge conglomerate, and it was a cult of personality under Jack Welch. GE on Tuesday just cut its dividend by 1/2 and is shedding about 50% of its different product lines to get back to its core mission, because it needs to figure out where the epicenter purpose of that business is at. I think the Air Force, more than any other service, is at that GE 3M moment. And I think that they both come with consequences. I think either course of action is fine. I think one of the things that's most important is to understand what it is that you're wrestling with as a service. And you all, especially if you go into this space as civilian leaders, it's something that you need to understand that service has been wrestling with this for a long time. So if you take nothing else out of this particular conversation, more than any other service, the United States Air Force is diffuse, feudal, non-monolithic. There is no such thing as the United States Air Force other than the same way GE as a conglomerate was all GE. That's what the United States Air Force is right now, I would argue. It's a conglomerate. Could be absolutely fine, but that is what I would argue. Okay, so now that should have at least annoyed a few of you. And so the question is, what are the questions in the conversation? Yeah.
What led you to conclude that the Air Force's core competency is innovation? Like what historical examples of that?
So as I was looking at the narratives, one of the things I was looking for the common thread, and I kept going back to, okay, so how do I think about innovation? I borrow from Millett and Murray, which is the operational concepts, the people, and the technologies, and then what I obsess about is what's the operational problem that you're trying to solve. And the Air Force at different points in time was really trying to solve some not only operational problems, but critical national problems. Peace is our profession was all about strategic deterrence, right? Now, it's not solving it all on its own. You have folks at RAND, you have folks in academia, but how you actually thought about basing, how you thought about alert, how you brought those people online, that was all brand new. here it's easy in the early parts of the narrative because the innovation and the technology are one. I mean, this is, and then one of the things that begins to happen is they begin to diffuse out. Down here, what you have are different examples of how you think about suppression of enemy air defenses, how you think about strategic bombing. So that's how I came up with that particular threat. What do you think? Am I wrong?
I mean, it seems to me that the Air Force actually in recent history resisted a lot of change. They resisted ICBMs, they resisted drones. To me, it kind of seemed off the cuff that long-range bombing was their last real big push into innovation. But I could see the deterrent and the response piece too.
So on the, I think you can have both. The ICBM one is a great example, right? You take Schriever. So Schriever's an Air Force officer who is empowered by a civilian, right? So this is the beginning of the tribalism. So you have one part, you have Curtis LeMay, who is like, I don't want to spend a dime on ICBMs. I'm assuming that's what you're thinking of. Then you got this whole other Air Force that begins to emerge that doesn't identify at all with that bomber force. And then that Space Force is even one more removed than that. So your point's an important one because it's not the entire service actually that is innovating. It is a large or a significant pocket in that service that is doing the innovation and that it's not embraced by all, which actually leads to the cacophony. Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, ma'am, a great point on that today would be cyber. How you have your traditional fighter communities and bombers, they don't really care necessarily about the cyber mission, but then there are those within those communities that do embrace the cyber impact to their platforms and so on and so forth, and how it is a growing entity in the Air Force. So I can see how there would definitely be both.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure, so on that one, and I don't know the answer to this, I'd be curious, what you're seeing today. I'm not even sure anybody in the Air Force has embraced cyber. I think everybody's talking it, and once again, we're focused on the Air Force here. I could shake the stick at other services as well. But in the military's defense, I don't know how you recruit, assess, retain, train folks across this vast, mission set. So I know that people in the Air Force are shaking their head and they're going, we're all in. What I see is that all the Air Force cyber experts, by the time they're lieutenant colonels, they're up at NSA. They're no longer, they're wearing an Air Force uniform, but they're no longer in the Air Force. They're at NSA, they're at Cyber Command, and they never come back. So is that unfair?
I would say that just because you're at NSA or you're part of Cyber Command, that's the Air Force's component to that mission. It's a joint mission anyways, right? So when you look at the 25th Air Force, the standing up with the cyber mission teams, there are problems with assessing, recruiting, training, and retaining those individuals, and they haven't fully embraced with things like up and out and so on. But the Air Force is working towards that. I think just like all the other branches are, right? The Army people don't necessarily want cyber any more than the Air Force does, but there are key fields and people that do want to say that and do want to stay airmen, but obviously you have to be part of the joint fight in order to implement it. So it doesn't mean that everybody embraces it, but there are certainly communities that do embrace it, in my opinion.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm also a cyber and intel officer. So
Yeah. Well, I argue that you guys, by the time, if you become a colonel, unless you are one now.
No, heaven forbid.
I argue that by the time, and this is another sort of the diffusion of identities and the associated narrative is by the time an Air Force intel officer, especially as a one-star, if they don't identify more with the DNI, with the national mission than they do with the air mission, something went haywire because their promotion and their incentivizing actually, if you don't serve somewhere in the national intel community, you aren't a real intel person, right?
Right. You need to have I mean, yeah, as far as intel's concerned in the Air Force, you absolutely have to be technically competent, but right now you can still get away with being a fighter intel person and not being all that super smart on cyber, but hopefully 30, 40 years from now, that will have changed to where the intel people, if there even is that distinction, are very well versed in cyber because it permeates everything.
Okay, now, somebody without any military background, and I don't care, I'm sort of looking around the room, I'm making
There's
eye
one.
contact here, okay? So what do you think?
Well, what came to mind in thinking about the GE example, as a stockholder who's watched that nicely decrease to very little now,
You can go. Fear not.
No, we like to keep them here.
Here,
You have to
The
push.
camera will
I
come
think
from
this
the,
one works.
no, the other way. There you go. That's,
GE announced that it was exiting the locomotive manufacturing, but making train engines. Do you think, really? In 2017? Does the Air Force have legacy pieces of its
All over.
organization that similarly you need to recognize that we're maybe not going to need that many locomotives anymore?
Okay, the A-10, right? So,
Oh.
so this is, and this is a great rejoinder, by the way, to my argument. I said the A-10 jokingly, but only half jokingly. And once again, if you guys, for those of you without a military background, if you don't know what the A-10 is, and you haven't been following the Capitol Hill debate, just Google A-10 and follow that debate, okay? Because the Air Force would say that, damn it, I'm trying to divest. I'm trying to get rid of infrastructure, and I'm trying to get rid of old platforms that are hard to maintain, that cost a ton, and the Congress isn't letting me do it. So to my GE example, they would say, we want to shed some of this stuff, but we're not being allowed to do it. Now, the civilian response to that should be, Air Force, if we left you guys to your own devices, you would really screw something up. Because what you would be doing is you would be chasing, you got the F-22 and the F-35, you're already talking about what your next fighter going to be, you would be focused on what the next cool aircraft is. So we need to tell you what matters to you, so no, you're not going to.
you wouldn't have the A-10 either.
So,
Right?
no, you wouldn't.
That really came from outside.
Right. And that's which is a different argument that goes all the way back to at least Korea, probably World War II, Kasserine Pass, which is the Army will say, so now we're into a different thing, which not divesting, but in terms of who determines what's important and how we do it. The Air Force would say to close air support that of course we get close air support. We care about our people on the ground. We care because they're all part of the United States. They're all part of the United States military. We love the infantry. We care deeply about you guys. Just don't tell us how to do CAS. The guys on the ground are going, you need to show up on our timeline, not on your timeline.
More than 7
And you need
minutes.
to, what's that?
For more than 7 minutes.
For more, and with the weapons that we want. And one of the things when I talk to special operators, guess what they love more than anything else? They love the Reaper hovering that can, trigger off whenever they need it to trigger off. They don't, that's, and they love that so much, they want a specific operator, Billy Bob, I recognize his voice, to be the one that actually pickles off the weapon. So this is a different cultural challenge. But the Air Force institutional answer to that would be, we do want to divest some of this stuff, but at the same time we want to divest, we want to sweep it all up. We want to sweep up cyber. We want to sweep up anything that brings dollars into our mission area. So is that an ambivalent, completely unsatisfactory answer?
I was supporting those guys on the ground.
That's so. There's got to be somebody down here.
Well, I'm thinking about the risk associated with innovation, and that you're you know, trying to identify specific problem sets that you think will be relevant in the future and trying to focus your capabilities to meet those at the risk of perhaps not maintaining a broader umbrella of capabilities that would, you know, if you have misestimated the challenges you're going to be facing in the future, then you might leave yourself exposed and not have the right, you know, whether it's organizational capacity, whether it's technology, training, whatever it is, that if you're too focused on innovation, that could end up being risky in the long run.
How would you manage that?
That's a, I mean, I suppose there would have to be some sort of determination of what are these sort of core competencies that we need to maintain at all times, even if we don't necessarily envision them being, you know, particularly relevant in the specific, you know, conflicts we envision being relevant in the next, you know, 20, 30 years, but I don't personally have enough expertise to determine what those core competencies would be. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I would say it's both, right? So militaries, you guys have all read Huntington, right? Militaries are like intensely and immensely conservative institutions, small c, not big c. And there's a reason for that. And you give up things slowly for exactly the reason that you're talking about. So I'm not talking about, okay, unmanned is out, we are all in on algorithmic warfare and, you know, all of these other things. If we get the algorithms right, we'll be so far ahead of any adversary that we don't even need to really worry about manned flight, right? I mean, that's exaggerated to make that point. So there is some sort of stable capability that you need to retain. The flip side is, and this is why I keep focusing on what is the problem that you're trying to solve on behalf of the nation. And if you look, I would argue, if you look at interwar periods, pick your interwar period, one of my favorite ones is to, you know, look at the Army in the 1920s and the 1930s as it was looking at, okay, what's the problem I want to solve, right? I've come home, I have cavalry, I have tanks, I have signal corps with some aircraft, and if you look at how that unpacked itself, because there was no focusing problem, and I could do the same thing with the other services, every interest within the Army was allowed to sustain at some minimal level what it wanted to keep. You know, so the case for the horse cavalry in the 20s and 30s was, hey, you never know, we might be in some area where the automobile can't get, and you know, and so we might need to have those horses. I mean, this is how Eisenhower and Patton almost get crushed, right? Because there's like, we think there's something to this tank. This is, you know, so once again, exaggerated to make the point. I would say all the services did the same thing in the 1990s, which was you're coming out of the Cold War, you're coming out of Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Oh my God, what is the justification that I made for this military? And the broader the problem set you can think of, the more you can justify a very diverse force structure. So part of this is if you pick a big enough, vexing enough problem, that you will come up with a solution set that is sufficient enough that you're never going to get it 100% right. The question is how do you minimize how much of it you get wrong? And this is my way of thinking about how you minimize how much you get wrong. Are we over?
No, we're not. I was just checking my watch. We got a half hour.
So,
You know, I mean, Air Forces do two basic things, right? They clear the skies and they drop bombs on things, whether it's near-in, close air support, or it's strategic bombing. So whatever innovation they provide is sort of constrained by what they do. I mean, if you're thinking of the Air Force as coming up with really innovative ways to solve national problems, well, give me an example of where they've done that.
strategic bombing. I mean, whether or not they.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not saying that the solution set is. I would say your shock and awe campaign and Desert Shield, Desert Storm, which was the stealth and precision revolution. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that no single service wins anything. And I would also say, and this actually goes back to your question, that I think just about most airmen would disagree with the statement you just made, right? They
Yeah.
would say, hey, listen, you got this global mobility force. The Army doesn't get anywhere
Yeah.
if we don't deliver these guys. And, we have this air refueling capability that is the envy of the world, that the Chinese are doing everything they can to replicate. I think that they would say when it comes to,
Yes.
so it's, but the flip side of my comment is, and it goes to what the other services are doing, they'd say, hey, Air Force, if you're doing such a great job, then why is the Army now buying drones at a faster rate than the Air Force? If you look at the Gray Eagle program, that pretty soon the Army is going to be, it's not going to be as far along as the Marine Corps when it comes to the aviation arm, but it's going to be pretty robust, and so you would call that a vote of no confidence.
Just till all of the students come up with another question. When I teach culture, coming out of the Army, I think of the Army as, you use the word feudal, right? I mean, the Army is like 14th century France, right? It's got signal corps, armor, infantry, the loggies, about 21 branches they're trying, and as a result, if it comes to define a requirement for a new weapon or set priorities in the budget process, it's totally stymied, right? Because all of these 2-stars out there are calling in and getting their little clump of the budget. I've always felt that the Air Force, if you're the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, you want the F-22, now you want the F-35, you want the B-21, and maybe you want this tanker that's out there, but that's really secondary. I mean, you're setting priorities is just so much easier. Now
You're setting priorities because of the particular leadership tribe that you come out of, right?
But the number of things that you have to buy is much more sharply constrained. And this is a political system in which expensive systems are better than cheap systems, right? Because once an expensive system gets going, you can't cancel it. I mean, why is it that the Army systems are usually canceled? They're just cheap compared to an F-22 or an F-35.
So let me disagree with that.
Okay.
FCS.
That was Shinseki's. I was around for that. That was Shinseki's attempt to create a system as big and expensive as the other services.
And it flunked and it got canceled.
Yeah. Oh no, but again, the chief has so much trouble managing across this feudal domain. This is a different kind of feudalism. It's sort of stacked up history, whereas the Army is operational. All of these guys got to work together in combat, but it has the same effect. I'm always thinking about. Well, I teach a course on the budget. How do the service interact in the budget process? And I still think it's easier for the Air Force to pick 1 or 2 priorities and drive them into the system. Whereas if the chief says, okay, what's my priorities? He's got 15 of them, the Army chief. And that makes it very difficult. And the next chief will have a different set of priorities, so things fall apart. Then I wonder, do you think it's easier for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force? Probably not, right?
I think for all the service chiefs, it's probably equally hard, but in a different way. So like the Air Force for the F-22 and then the F-35, the Air Force didn't put forward, if you've been following the whole light attack issue. The Air Force struggled with, should we come up with a light attack aircraft at the height of OIF and OEF. And the internal debate was, we probably should, but we don't want anything to threaten the F-22. So the Air Force will make internal, not only budget decisions, But if you follow now the Air Force's thing about we're too small, you know, we can't do everything that we're required to do. We've got, and so now the current chief is saying we need robotics and all that. The reason we are so small is we sacrificed upwards of 25,000 personnel billets. So literally shrunk the size of the Air Force in order to keep the budget line alive to fund the F-22 and the F-35. And at the time, the internal wisdom was, we know that this is going to go bad. It did go bad, and this is one of the powers of Governor's argument, right? Which is sometimes the service can't help itself because it has convinced itself it needs this next generation qualitatively better piece of equipment. So yeah, but I think all of the services struggle. So I'm looking at these faces down here. You guys are either disengaged, bored, or I need to move down to that part of the table so I can haze you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll kind of jump in. Speaking to what you just mentioned about kind of shrinking the size of personnel, how do you balance keeping that human capital with continuing that technological kind of innovation?
Actually, I would be before I answer, I have what I think is an answer. How would you answer that?
Oh gosh. I think the first question would then be quantity versus quality. I mean, half of having people is having kind of what their capabilities are, so that would be another complicating factor. I wish I had an answer.
Yeah, no, this is a hugely important question, and goes back to how So the Army is of all the services, the Army is probably the most manpower intensive, right? One of the things that is always fun to wrestle with when it comes to thinking about militaries is militaries are inherently inefficient, right? No nation, in a purest form, what nation wants to spend money on a military? The only reason you spend money on a military is because you are concerned about external threats, that you need to have violent means in order to somehow deal with that external threat, right? So one of the things I think that has gotten into the military psyche as well as the civilian leadership psyche is somehow we can be both effective and efficient. After going around that pole for many, many years, I've come up with militaries are inherently inefficient by their design. Now, there are things that you can do to make them better, but I think one of the first things that you need to do is accept this is a human endeavor. If it's not a human endeavor, what is it, right? Then it could well still be important and everything else. So at the end of the day, so like this F-22 personnel trade-off, at the time of that debate, I was like, this is just bad. We're not that large of a service. This is a bad move. Now, the comment back that somebody could very fairly make to me is, hey, Thornhill, you've never flown. You've never been in an F-22. You have no idea how capable this thing is. You have no idea that you have a full aircraft carrier's worth of capability in this particular system. So not only can we give you up, but we're actually buying extra manpower. So this gets to analytics. This actually gets to, and once again, for civilians moving into this space, do not let military people BS you. Make them show.
We teach that. We teach that here.
It is, and I've watched it time and again. Make them show you what their analytics are. Make sure that they compare apples to apples. If they do the hand wave, call them on the hand wave and kick them out. That's just don't put up with it. Yeah.
So if we're moving to this more sort of innovation-focused paradigm, what shifts do you envision if any, in the sort of R&D and acquisition process for the Air Force. I guess my concern is sort of if you think about, anytime innovation comes up, it's the idea is you're being really iterative and you're, developing something new, and it didn't quite work out, let's throw that out, something new, right? Whereas to me, a lot of weapon systems are more sort of, like building a bridge, where sort of there needs to be a level of competence, and we need to be able to standardize this and mass produce this, and so, it didn't quite work out, oh well, let's do something else, right? Like there's a risk if you're trying to be too iterative in your development process. At the same time, though, the current acquisition process seems so sort of cumbersome, and if you spend 25, 30 years trying to develop something, and it's out of date by the time that it rolls off the production line.
So this is my pie in the sky answer, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with C.P. Snow, Two Cultures. This is.
We don't make you read Science and Government anymore. They made me read that in.
So I'm going to answer this with an anecdote, and then wax philosophical about why can't we do this anymore. During can't remember the Prime Minister, 1934, the Prime Minister, can't think of his name, went to the head of the RAF and said, okay, I got a question for you. Is the bomber always going to get through? So that is a policy question, that is of national security import, that is an operational question, that's a technology question. The RAF came back with no. And then the Prime Minister asked, okay, tell me how and why we are going to prevent the bomber from always getting through. And now think about that, okay? If you know your military history, 1940 is the Battle of Britain. This conversation is occurring in 1934. That is 6 years to figure out how Britain is going to protect itself from the attacks of the now nascent Luftwaffe under Nazi Germany. The answer to that was, okay, you know what we need to do? We need to take the operators, we need to take the scientists, we need to take the experimenters, and we need to lock, sort of an Apollo 13 moment, right? We need to lock all of these guys in a room until they actually come up with an example, and then operationalize that example and test that example, and then actually field it and put it out. So there are guys like Tizard, Slessor, can't believe I can't think of the Prime Minister, and all of these different teams that come together. What do they come up with? They come up with radar. They come up with an integrated air defense system. They come up with the whole idea of putting fighters on alert. They come up with overlapping, those radar overlapping sites, so that you actually have a significant early warning, so that you can get your fighters up as soon as possible, but not waste fuel. So from that one very huge policy operational question, then came all of those, came that entire development of how you thought about the fighters, the Spitfire, the Hurricanes, how you thought about radar, how you thought about integrated air defense, all of that. That came from the operators, the experimenters, the scientists, all working together and building trust. And then it came from this, from this very tight decision loop. Now the thing that drives all of that is, oh my God, this is an existential threat, right? That one of the luxuries and one of the problems that we have is, as a nation, when's the last time we have faced an existential threat? And you all will have your different views and opinions of what that might be. But urgency drives, to a certain extent, drives that innovation. How you create this, how you create that spirit, like I said, you have to go after it relentlessly. Do I believe that the Air Force is going to do it? No. What are the impacts of that? It will continue to have an increasingly diffuse culture with airmen that identify with a lot of things, but not necessarily with what the core Air Force mission is. Yeah.
And along the lines of the service chiefs making decisions on acquisitions and force structure, I think ideally that would be based off a warfighting concept they have, how they think they fight in the next decade or two. But the services could pick those on their own, so it's possible that they are divergent between services, not mutually supporting or just contradictory. Do you think that's an appropriate way that's done right now? If not, how should those warfighting concepts be created to be more joint and realistic?
So what do you think?
I mean, I think that should fall in the joint staff. Just because I've seen, like right now, the Army and kind of the Marines have their multi-domain battle concept.
They all four services have
And
multi-domain
then the
battle.
Navy and the Air Force went off on their own thing and did the sea air battle, which if you read them, they don't necessarily line up, and you're going to start making decisions to buy stuff over the next 2 decades that are going to be not supporting. So we end up kind of like what we have now in Iraq and Afghanistan, where you have an Air Force outfitted to do fighter to fighter and strategic bombing, and land forces that are running the assumption that they're going to have continuous and persistent air support, which in a more contested environment would not be the case. But the Joint Staff isn't outfitted to do that right now. So.
Right. So I think actually this is another fascinating issue that's playing out real time. Right? And my answer is going to be a very unsatisfying one, which is I think that at the end of the day, this is a roles and missions debate that is getting disguised as a multi-domain battle, global integrator debate. Every service now, the Air Force and the Navy got rid of air sea battle ages ago, right? So all of the services now have some version of multi-domain battle. I'm not really even sure what the heck that means. You know,
Sounds good though.
I'm like, multi-domain, okay, that's land, sea, air, space, cyber, right? So what else is it? Is it algorithmic? Every time somebody talks to me about algorithmic warfare, I'm like, so what am I going to do? Am I going to go up to MIT and hang around mathematicians? You know, what?
I've never heard that one, by the way. Can you, well.
I can't, you know, so,
Yeah,
so this is actually the intel guys. Are you doing any algorithmic warfare?
I mean, yeah, a bunch of my friends work for like Project Maven. So, you know, it's essentially that algorithms are going to lead you to decisions on what to engage. You know, kind of big data, shove it all together, increase targets, yada yada.
So it's machine on machine learning, and it's actually creating a whole nother layer of questions over what should militaries do and why. So when I follow do you guys know? Does everybody know what multi-domain battle is? We've all been studying that. Yes, no.
Give us a little on that.
Well, from the Army perspective, it's the different domains, air, sea, land, space, cyber, that the Army is kind of at least outwardly saying we might not always be the supported service all the time. We might be supporting like the Navy or the Air Force, which means that we might have to do something to open a window of opportunity for like the Air Force to actually be the decisive part of the battle. And for the Army, that means, okay, can we do air defense from the sea or from some tiny island in the Pacific? Or, you know, what can we do to affect the cyber domain, but in a geographical sense? Like, what does the Army bring into that? So you know, we shut down a network in a specific geographic location, a specific time, so that the Navy can pass through a tight spot and, you know, go get decisive terrain on a sea.
So, so good summary from the Army perspective. Every service has a version of this, right? So you're going to get the Thornhill, you know, I spent way too long in Washington, D.C. answer to the multi-domain battle. Every service has a view of this. Every service, I would argue, uses it to justify things to buy that, in theory, in a more joint environment, they should be relying on somebody else to buy. So, so the Air Force would say the new deep attack weapons that the Army is fielding, whatever those deep fires are, that new system.
Ultra fast.
Yeah, they would say, listen, all you guys are doing is you're taking over our interdiction and you know, casserole and the line between there. The Air Force would say that, that the Marines continuing to field F-35s and continuing to insist that the F-35s are organic air. The Air Force would say all you guys are doing is you are making sure that you always have your own airplanes. The Army would say, yeah, that's because Air Force, you guys aren't providing it, which is why in this multi-domain battle, because we can't rely on each other's to be there, we need to have our own set of redundancies. So I see in multi-domain battle, whatever version that you're looking at, I see it a justification by the services to create redundancies that traditional roles and missions debates said you need to get rid of. The chairman's role in all of this is something that is fascinating and real time. That I'm assuming you guys all read like War on the Rocks and follow the debates of what the chairman is doing. The chairman has been declared, I believe, officially the global integrator, which gives the chairman the right to adjudicate across services and across combatant commands. When it comes to prioritizing mission and prioritizing equipment. These are all hugely important decisions. Once again, looking, and I think almost all of you are civilians in the room, looking to the civilians in the room where you sit there and go, okay, maybe the chairman is exactly the right person to do that. When's the last time this was debated in Congress? Never. When's the last time that there was then even a hearing on this? Never. How do we know that the global integrator role is the exact right answer? Well, we don't, because we never actually have had the conversation. So this is backdooring into more empowering of the chairman and the operationalizing of the joint staff, which, to answer very complex problems today, could be exactly the right one. If you've been tracking the history of how national defense structures have evolved since 1947, you know just how bloody and dirty these fights become. One of the things that's interesting is how did such an important decision as this get taken and at least partially implemented without a public debate.
But, you know, this is where the services buy things, right? I mean, what's operationally available is set right in this town, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm thinking, you know, you skip through McNamara sort of, and McNamara saw himself as the global integrator.
Which the secretary and the president are.
Yeah, you would have asked, you know,
right.
Why do we need the chairman to do
right.
that? It certainly allows him to even expand itself even more. So now we have OSD and the Joint Staff
right.
equally, but you know, McNamara canceled the Century series essentially and forced the Air Force to buy the Navy's F-4. And that totally changed the capabilities the Air Force could bring to the operational domain, right? So what I'm saying is that the decisions on operation, I mean, I don't know what General Miles, where does he want this decision to be made?
Well, no, his point was, he would agree that the Secretary of Defense is the global integrator.
Yeah.
And that's the right place for it.
Yeah.
Not the chairman.
And OSD, at least, you know, but OSD would love to shape the services, and they do, but you know, I teach this budget course, you know, you've got to pick your fights very carefully, right. And an awful lot just goes by, right?
Right.
This is a complicated town politically,
right.
You know? Not every government has to deal with an independent Congress that just has its own
right.
vested interests, But you know, I mean, Gates in canceling the F-22, which I think was a mistake actually, but you know, he was trying to shift the Air Force attention, right? Just like McNamara was,
right.
change the operational.
Well, I mean, and Gates's point, and actually goes back to one of the questions I think over here. You know, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, we're fine. Go ahead, finish.
You know, it's next waritis, right? That's Gates just you know, wire brush the Air Force, all the services, but the Air Force got it particularly bad because he was like, why are you guys always preparing to fight the next war rather than fighting the war that you're in? And there is a legitimate point about that, which is if you look at the Air Force's performance in Korea and Vietnam, they're like, hey, this isn't the word, these are, the F4, the 105, these are not good, CAS, BAI aircraft. No, these are the aircraft that we want to buy. And so Gates was trying to make that point of, the war we're in requires a lot of drones. And if it requires a lot of drones, one way or the other, United States Air Force, you're going to buy them. And then you're going to quadruple or more the number of caps that you're flying. And if I have to sacrifice the F-22 while the F-35 is a perfectly fine aircraft, I will do it. And I happen to disagree with that statement also. I will say, though, that the Air Force deserved it. The Air Force was being petulant and petty at that time, and they deserved to be pulled up short. But this to your, and it's an outstanding and important question, and one to watch is who actually takes those huge decisions over who gets things and who doesn't get things. If I have a problem up in the Baltics, at the same time I have a problem in Niger, at the same time I have to worry about the South China Sea, and I only have enough force structure to deal with 1.5 of those, who wins, who loses? Do you want the chairman, a uniformed guy, making that choice, or do you want the Secretary of Defense making that choice? So either might be okay, but my point
The
is...
chairman actually doesn't have the legal authority to do that, right?
Right, so this whole global integrator
The
thing...
secretary has
this
the law.
whole global integrator thing is just
Yeah,
fascinating.
okay, I wasn't aware of that. That
Yeah,
one stuns me.
fascinating.
Okay, look, we
Okay,
could
so
go on.
anyhow,
This
we got-
was terrific. Let's hear